Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we wander into the warm glow of an old and beloved treasury of tales, a gentle retelling inspired by the charm and wonder of the red fairy tradition. These are stories gathered from many lands, carried across generations, filled with mystery, bravery, mischief, and magic. If this quiet journey brings you calm, feel free to like and subscribe and share where you're listening from tonight. Now, settle in, let the world soften and grow still, and join me as we step into a crimson-lit realm of folklore, where every page whispers a new enchantment for dreamers like you. The 12 Brothers. There were once upon a time a king and a queen who lived happily together, and they had 12 children, all of whom were boys. One day the king said to his wife, "If our 13th child is a girl, all her 12 brothers must die, so that she may be very rich and the kingdom hers alone." Then he ordered 12 coffins to be made, and filled them with shavings, and placed a little pillow in each. These he put away in an empty room, and giving the key to his wife, he bade her tell no one of it. The queen grieved over the sad fate of her sons, and refused to be comforted, so much so that the youngest boy, who was always with her, and whom she had christened Benjamin, said to her one day, "Dear mother, why are you so sad?" "My child," she answered, "I may not tell you the reason." But he left her no peace, till she went and unlocked the room and showed him the 12 coffins filled with shavings, and with the little pillow laid in each. Then she said, "My dearest Benjamin, your father has had these coffins made for you and your 11 brothers, because if I bring a girl into the world, you are all to be killed and buried in them." She wept bitterly as she spoke, but her son comforted her and said, "Don't cry, dear mother. We'll manage to escape somehow, and we'll fly for our lives." "Yes," replied his mother, "that is what you must do. Go with your 11 brothers out into the wood, and let one of you always sit on the highest tree you can find, keeping watch on the tower of the castle. If I give birth to a little son, I will wave a white flag, and then you may safely return. But if I give birth to a little daughter, I will wave a red flag, which will warn you to fly away as quickly as you can. And may the kind heaven have pity on you. Every night I will get up and pray for you, in winter that you may always have a fire to warm yourselves by, and in summer that you may not languish in the heat." Then she blessed her sons, and they set out into the wood. They found a very high oak tree, and there they sat, turn about, keeping their eyes always fixed on the castle tower. On the 12th day, when the turn came to Benjamin, he noticed a flag waving in the air. But alas, it was not white, but blood red, the sign which told them they must all die. When the brothers heard this, they were very angry, and said, "Shall we forsooth suffer death for the sake of a wretched girl? Let us swear vengeance, and vow that wherever and whenever we shall meet one of her sex, she shall die at our hands." Then they went their way deeper into the wood, and in the middle of it, where it was thickest and darkest, they came upon a little enchanted house which stood empty. "Here," they said, "let us take up our abode, and you, Benjamin, you are the youngest and weakest. You shall stay at home and keep house for us. We others will go out and fetch food." So they went forth into the wood, and shot hares and roe deer, birds and wood pigeons, and any other game they came across. They always brought their spoils home to Benjamin, who soon learnt to make them into dainty dishes. So they lived for 10 years in this little house, and the time slipped merrily away. In the meantime, their little sister at home was growing up quickly. She was kind-hearted and of a fair countenance, and she had a gold star right in the middle of her forehead. One day, a big washing was going on at the palace, and the girl, looking down from her window, saw 12 men's shirts hanging up to dry, and asked her mother, "Who in the world do these shirts belong to? Surely they are far too small for my father." And the queen answered sadly, "Dear child, they belong to your 12 brothers. But where are my 12 brothers?" said the girl. "I have never even heard of them." "Heaven alone knows in what part of the wide world they are wandering," replied her mother. Then she took the girl and opened the locked-up room. She showed her the 12 coffins filled with shavings, and with the little pillow laid in each. "These coffins," she said, "were intended for your brothers, but they stole secretly away before you were born." Then she proceeded to tell her all that had happened, and when she had finished, her daughter said, "Do not cry, dearest mother. I will go and seek my brothers till I find them." So she took the 12 shirts and went on straight into the middle of the big wood. She walked all day long and came in the evening to the little enchanted house. She stepped in and found a youth who, marveling at her beauty, at the royal robes she wore, and at the golden star on her forehead, asked her where she came from and whither she was going. "I am a princess," she answered, "and am seeking for my 12 brothers. I mean to wander as far as the blue sky stretches over the earth till I find them." Then she showed him the 12 shirts which she had taken with her, and Benjamin saw that it must be his sister, and said, "I am Benjamin, your youngest brother." So they wept for joy, and kissed and hugged each other again and again. After a time, Benjamin said, "Dear sister, there is still a little difficulty, for we had all agreed that any girl we met should die at our hands, because it was for the sake of a girl that we had to leave our kingdom." "But," she replied, "I will gladly die if by that means I can restore my 12 brothers to their own." "No," he answered, "there is no need for that. Only go and hide under that tub till our 11 brothers come in, and I'll soon make matters right with them." She did as she was bid, and soon the others came home from the chase and sat down to supper. "Well, Benjamin, what's the news?" they asked. But he replied, "I like that. Have you nothing to tell me?" "No," they answered. Then he said, "Well, now, you've been out in the wood all the day, and I've stayed quietly at home, and all the same, I know more than you do." "Then tell us," they cried. But he answered, "Only on condition that you promise faithfully that the first girl we meet shall not be killed." "She shall be spared," they promised. "Only tell us the news." Then Benjamin said, "Our sister is here." And he lifted up the tub, and the princess stepped forward, with her royal robes and with the golden star on her forehead, looking so lovely and sweet and charming that they all fell in love with her on the spot. They arranged that she should stay at home with Benjamin and help him in the housework, while the rest of the brothers went out into the wood and shot hares and roe deer, birds and wood pigeons. And Benjamin and his sister cooked their meals for them. She gathered herbs to cook the vegetables in, fetched the wood, and watched the pots on the fire. And always when her 11 brothers returned, she had their supper ready for them. Besides this, she kept the house in order, tidied all the rooms, and made herself so generally useful that her brothers were delighted, and they all lived happily together. One day the two at home prepared a fine feast, And when they were all assembled, they sat down and ate and drank and made merry. Now there was a little garden round the enchanted house, in which grew 12 tall lilies. The girl, wishing to please her brothers, plucked the 12 flowers, meaning to present one to each of them as they sat at supper. But hardly had she plucked the flowers when her brothers were turned into 12 ravens, who flew croaking over the wood, and the house and garden vanished also. So the poor girl found herself left all alone in the wood. And as she looked round her, she noticed an old woman standing close beside her, who said, "My child, what have you done? Why didn't you leave the flowers alone? They were your 12 brothers. Now they are changed forever into ravens." The girl asked, sobbing, "Is there no means of setting them free?" "No," said the old woman. "There is only one way in the whole world, and that is so difficult that you won't free them by it, for you would have to be dumb and not laugh for 7 years. And if you spoke a single word, though but an hour were wanting to the time, your silence would all have been in vain, and that one word would slay your brothers." Then the girl said to herself, "If that is all, I am quite sure I can free my brothers." So she searched for a high tree, and when she had found one, she climbed up it and spun all day long, never laughing or speaking one word. Now it happened one day that a king who was hunting in the wood had a large greyhound, who ran sniffing to the tree on which the girl sat, and jumped round it, yelping and barking furiously. The king's attention was attracted, and when he looked up and beheld the beautiful princess with the golden star on her forehead, he was so enchanted by her beauty that he asked her on the spot to be his wife. She gave no answer, but nodded slightly with her head. Then he climbed up the tree himself, lifted her down, put her on his horse, and bore her home to his palace. The marriage was celebrated with much pomp and ceremony, but the bride neither spoke nor laughed. When they had lived a few years happily together, the king's mother, who was a wicked old woman, began to slander the young queen, and said to the king, "She is only a low-born beggar maid that you have married. Who knows what mischief she is up to? If she is deaf and can't speak, she might at least laugh. Depend upon it, those who don't laugh have a bad conscience." At first, the king paid no heed to her words, but the old woman harped so long on the subject and accused the young queen of so many bad things that at last he let himself be talked over and condemned his beautiful wife to death. So a great fire was lit in the courtyard of the palace, where she was to be burnt, and the king watched the proceedings from an upper window, crying bitterly the while, for he still loved his wife dearly. But just as she had been bound to the stake, and the flames were licking her garments with their red tongues, the very last moment of the 7 years had come. Then a sudden rushing sound was heard in the air, and 12 ravens were seen flying overhead. They swooped downwards, and as soon as they touched the ground, they turned into her 12 brothers. And she knew that she had freed them. They quenched the flames and put out the fire, and unbinding their dear sister from the stake, they kissed and hugged her again and again. And now that she was able to open her mouth and speak, she told the king why she had been dumb and not able to laugh. The king rejoiced greatly when he heard she was innocent, and they all lived happily ever afterwards. Rapunzel. Once upon a time, there lived a man and his wife who were very unhappy because they had no children. These good people had a little window at the back of their house, which looked into the most lovely garden, full of all manner of beautiful flowers and vegetables. But the garden was surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to enter it, for it belonged to a witch of great power, who was feared by the whole world. One day the woman stood at the window overlooking the garden, and saw there a bed full of the finest rampion. The leaves looked so fresh and green that she longed to eat them. The desire grew day by day, and just because she knew she couldn't possibly get any, she pined away and became quite pale and wretched. Then her husband grew alarmed and said, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Oh," she answered, "if I don't get some rampion to eat out of the garden behind the house, I know I shall die." The man, who loved her dearly, thought to himself, "Come, rather than let your wife die, you shall fetch her some rampion, no matter the cost." So at dusk he climbed over the wall into the witch's garden, and hastily gathering a handful of rampion leaves, he returned with them to his wife. She made them into a salad, which tasted so good that her longing for the forbidden food was greater than ever. If she were to know any peace of mind, there was nothing for it but that her husband should climb over the garden wall again and fetch her some more. So at dusk over he got, but when he reached the other side, he drew back in terror, for there, standing before him, was the old witch. "How dare you," she said with a wrathful glance, "climb into my garden and steal my rampion like a common thief? You shall suffer for your foolhardiness." "Oh," he implored, "pardon my presumption. Necessity alone drove me to the deed. My wife saw your rampion from her window, and conceived such a desire for it that she would certainly have died if her wish had not been gratified." Then the witch's anger was a little appeased, and she said, "If it's as you say, you may take as much rampion away with you as you like, but on one condition only, that you give me the child your wife will shortly bring into the world. All shall go well with it, and I will look after it like a mother." The man in his terror agreed to everything she asked, and as soon as the child was born, the witch appeared, and having given it the name of Rapunzel, which is the same as rampion, she carried it off with her. Rapunzel was the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the witch shut her up in a tower in the middle of a great wood, and the tower had neither stairs nor doors, only high up at the very top a small window. When the old witch wanted to get in, she stood underneath and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair." For Rapunzel had wonderful long hair, and it was as fine as spun gold. Whenever she heard the witch's voice, she unloosed her plaits and let her hair fall down out of the window about 20 yards below, and the old witch climbed up by it. After they had lived like this for a few years, it happened one day that a prince was riding through the wood and passed by the tower. As he drew near it, he heard someone singing so sweetly that he stood still, spellbound, and listened. It was Rapunzel in her loneliness, trying to while away the time by letting her sweet voice ring out into the wood. The prince longed to see the owner of the voice, but he sought in vain for a door in the tower. He rode home, but he was so haunted by the song he had heard that he returned every day to the wood and listened. One day, when he was standing thus behind a tree, he saw the old witch approach and heard her call out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair." Then Rapunzel let down her plaits, and the witch climbed up by them. "So that's the staircase, is it?" said the prince. "Then I too will climb it and try my luck." So on the following day, at dusk, He went to the foot of the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair." And as soon as she had let it down, the prince climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man came in, for she had never seen one before. But the prince spoke to her so kindly and told her at once that his heart had been so touched by her singing that he felt he should know no peace of mind till he had seen her. Very soon, Rapunzel forgot her fear, and when he asked her to marry him, she consented at once. "For," she thought, "he is young and handsome, and I'll certainly be happier with him than with the old witch." So she put her hand in his and said, "Yes, I will gladly go with you. Only how am I to get down out of the tower? Every time you come to see me, you must bring a skein of silk with you, and I will make a ladder of them. And when it is finished, I will climb down by it, and you will take me away on your horse." They arranged that till the ladder was ready, he was to come to her every evening, because the old woman was with her during the day. The old witch, of course, knew nothing of what was going on, till one day Rapunzel, not thinking of what she was about, turned to the witch and said, "How is it, good mother, that you are so much harder to pull up than the young prince? He is always with me in a moment." "Oh, you wicked child," cried the witch. "What is this I hear? I thought I had hidden you safely from the whole world, and in spite of it you have managed to deceive me." In her wrath, she seized Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wound it round and round her left hand, and then grasping a pair of scissors in her right, snip, snap, off it came, and the beautiful plaits lay on the ground. And, worse than this, she was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel to a lonely desert place, and there left her to live in loneliness and misery. But on the evening of the day in which she had driven poor Rapunzel away, the witch fastened the plaits onto a hook in the window, and when the prince came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your golden hair," she let them down, and the prince climbed up as usual. But instead of his beloved Rapunzel, he found the old witch, who fixed her evil, glittering eyes on him and cried mockingly, "Ah, ah, you thought to find your lady love, but the pretty bird has flown and its song is dumb. The cat caught it and will scratch out your eyes too. Rapunzel is lost to you forever. You will never see her more." The prince was beside himself with grief, and in his despair he jumped right down from the tower, and though he escaped with his life, the thorns among which he fell pierced his eyes out. Then he wandered, blind and miserable, through the wood, eating nothing but roots and berries, and weeping and lamenting the loss of his lovely bride. So he wandered about for some years, as wretched and unhappy as he could well be. And at last he came to the desert place where Rapunzel was living. Of a sudden he heard a voice which seemed strangely familiar to him. He walked eagerly in the direction of the sound, and when he was quite close, Rapunzel recognized him and fell on his neck and wept. But 2 of her tears touched his eyes, and in a moment they became quite clear again, and he saw as well as he had ever done. Then he led her to his kingdom, where they were received and welcomed with great joy, and they lived happily ever after. The Nettle Spinner. Once upon a time, there lived at Quesnoy, in Flanders, a great lord whose name was Burchard, but whom the country people called Burchard the Wolf. Now Burchard had such a wicked, cruel heart that it was whispered how he used to harness his peasants to the plow and force them by blows from his whip to till his land with naked feet. His wife, on the other hand, was always tender and pitiful to the poor and miserable. Every time that she heard of another misdeed of her husband's, she secretly went to repair the evil, which caused her name to be blessed throughout the whole countryside. This countess was adored as much as the count was hated. One day when he was out hunting, the count passed through a forest, and at the door of a lonely cottage, he saw a beautiful girl spinning hemp. "What is your name?" he asked her. "Renelde, my lord." "You must get tired of staying in such a lonely place." "I am accustomed to it, my lord, and I never get tired of it." "That may be so, but come to the castle, and I will make you lady's maid to the countess." "I cannot do that, my lord. I have to look after my grandmother, who is very helpless." "Come to the castle, I tell you. I shall expect you this evening." And he went on his way. But Renelde, who was betrothed to a young woodcutter called Gilbert, had no intention of obeying the count, and she had, besides, to take care of her grandmother. 3 days later, the count again passed by. "Why didn't you come?" he asked the pretty spinner. "I told you, my lord, that I have to look after my grandmother." "Come tomorrow, and I will make you lady-in-waiting to the countess." And he went on his way. This offer produced no more effect than the other, and Renelde did not go to the castle. "If you will only come," said the count to her when next he rode by, "I will send away the countess and will marry you." But 2 years before, when Renelde's mother was dying of a long illness, the countess had not forgotten them, but had given help when they sorely needed it. So even if the count had really wished to marry Renelde, she would always have refused. Some weeks passed before Burchard appeared again. Renelde hoped she had got rid of him, when one day he stopped at the door, his duck gun under his arm and his game bag on his shoulder. This time, Renelde was spinning not hemp, but flax. "What are you spinning?" he asked in a rough voice. "My wedding shift, my lord." "You are going to be married then?" "Yes, my lord, by your leave." For at that time no peasant could marry without the leave of his master. "I will give you leave on one condition. Do you see those tall nettles that grow on the tombs in the churchyard? Go and gather them, and spin them into 2 fine shifts. One shall be your bridal shift, and the other shall be my shroud. For you shall be married the day that I am laid in my grave." And the count turned away with a mocking laugh. Renelde trembled. Never in all Locquignol had such a thing been heard of as the spinning of nettles, and besides, the count seemed made of iron, and was very proud of his strength, often boasting that he should live to be 100. Every evening, when his work was done, Gilbert came to visit his future bride. This evening he came as usual, and Renelde told him what Burchard had said. "Would you like me to watch for the wolf and split his skull with a blow from my axe?" "No," replied Renelde. "There must be no blood on my bridal bouquet. And then we must not hurt the count. Remember how good the countess was to my mother." An old woman now spoke. She was the mother of Renelde's grandmother, and was more than 90 years old. All day long she sat in her chair, nodding her head and never saying a word. "My children," she said, "all the years that I have lived in the world, I have never heard of a shift spun from nettles. But what God commands, man can do. Why should not Renelde try it?" Renelde did try, and to her great surprise, the nettles, when crushed and prepared, gave a good thread, soft and light and firm. Very soon she had spun the first shift, which was for her own wedding. She wove and cut it out at once, hoping that the Count would not force her to begin the other. Just as she had finished sewing it, Burchard the wolf passed by. "Well," said he, "how are the shifts getting on?" "Here, my lord, is my wedding garment," answered Renelda, showing him the shift, which was the finest and whitest ever seen. The Count grew pale, but he replied roughly, "Very good, now begin the other." The spinner set to work. As the Count returned to the castle, a cold shiver passed over him, and he felt, as the saying is, that someone was walking over his grave. He tried to eat his supper, but could not. He went to bed, shaking with fever. But he did not sleep, and in the morning could not manage to rise. This sudden illness, which every instant became worse, made him very uneasy. No doubt Renelda's spinning wheel knew all about it. Was it not necessary that his body, as well as his shroud, should be ready for the burial? The first thing Burchard did was to send to Renelda and to stop her wheel. Renelda obeyed, and that evening Gilbert asked her, "Has the Count given his consent to our marriage?" "No," said Renelda. "Continue your work, sweetheart. It is the only way of gaining it. You know he told you so himself." The following morning, as soon as she had put the house in order, the girl sat down to spin. 2 hours after there arrived some soldiers, and when they saw her spinning, they seized her, tied her arms and legs, and carried her to the bank of the river, which was swollen by the late rains. When they reached the bank, they flung her in and watched her sink, after which they left her. But Renelda rose to the surface, and though she could not swim, she struggled to land. Directly she got home, she sat down and began to spin. Again came the 2 soldiers to the cottage and seized the girl, carried her to the river bank, tied a stone to her neck, and flung her into the water. The moment their backs were turned, the stone untied itself. Renelda waded the ford, returned to the hut, and sat down to spin. This time the Count resolved to go to Locquignol himself, but as he was very weak and unable to walk, he had himself borne in a litter. And still the spinner spun. When he saw her, he fired a shot at her, as he would have fired at a wild beast. The bullet rebounded without harming the spinner, who still spun on. Burchard fell into such a violent rage that it nearly killed him. He broke the wheel into 1,000 pieces, and then fell fainting on the ground. He was carried back to the castle, unconscious. The next day the wheel was mended, and the spinner sat down to spin. Feeling that while she was spinning he was dying, the Count ordered that her hands should be tied, and that they should not lose sight of her for 1 instant. But the guards fell asleep, the bonds loosed themselves, and the spinner spun on. Burchard had every nettle rooted up for 3 leagues round. Scarcely had they been torn from the soil when they sowed themselves afresh, and grew as you were looking at them. They sprung up even in the well-trodden floor of the cottage, and as fast as they were uprooted, the distaff gathered to itself a supply of nettles, crushed, prepared, and ready for spinning. And every day Burchard grew worse and watched his end approaching. Moved by pity for her husband, the Countess at last found out the cause of his illness and entreated him to allow himself to be cured. But the Count, in his pride, refused more than ever to give his consent to the marriage. So the lady resolved to go without his knowledge to pray for mercy from the spinner. And in the name of Renelda's dead mother, she besought her to spin no more. Renelda gave her promise, but in the evening Gilbert arrived at the cottage. Seeing that the cloth was no farther advanced than it was the evening before, he inquired the reason. Renelde confessed that the Countess had prayed her not to let her husband die. "Will he consent to our marriage?" "No." "Let him die then." "But what will the Countess say?" "The Countess will understand that it is not your fault. The Count alone is guilty of his own death. Let us wait a little. Perhaps his heart may be softened." So they waited for 1 month, for 2, for 6, for a year. The spinner spun no more. The Count had ceased to persecute her, but he still refused his consent to the marriage. Gilbert became impatient. The poor girl loved him with her whole soul, and she was more unhappy than she had been before, when Burchard was only tormenting her body. "Let us have done with it," said Gilbert. "Wait a little still," pleaded Renelde. But the young man grew weary. He came more rarely to Locquignol, and very soon he did not come at all. Renelde felt as if her heart would break, but she held firm. One day she met the Count. She clasped her hands as if in prayer and cried, "My lord, have mercy." Burchard the wolf turned away his head and passed on. She might have humbled his pride had she gone to her spinning wheel again, but she did nothing of the sort. Not long after she learnt that Gilbert had left the country. He did not even come to say goodbye to her, but, all the same, she knew the day and hour of his departure, and hid herself on the road to see him once more. When she came in, she put her silent wheel into a corner, and cried for 3 days and 3 nights. So another year went by. Then the Count fell ill, and the Countess supposed that Renelde, weary of waiting, had begun her spinning anew. But when she came to the cottage to see, she found the wheel silent. However, the Count grew worse and worse till he was given up by the doctors. The passing bell was rung, and he lay expecting death to come for him. But death was not so near as the doctors thought, and still he lingered. In this extremity, he remembered what he had told the little spinner long ago. If death was so slow in coming, it was because he was not ready to follow him, having no shroud for his burial. He sent to fetch Renelde, placed her by his bedside, and ordered her at once to go on spinning his shroud. Hardly had the spinner begun to work when the Count began to feel his pains grow less. Then at last his heart melted. He was sorry for all the evil he had done out of pride, and implored Renelde to forgive him. So Renelde forgave him, and went on spinning night and day. When the thread of the nettles was spun, she wove it with her shuttle, and then cut the shroud and began to sew it. And as before, when she sewed, the Count felt his pains grow less, and the life sinking within him. And when the needle made the last stitch, he gave his last sigh. At the same hour, Gilbert returned to the country, and as he had never ceased to love Renelde, he married her 8 days later. He had lost 2 years of happiness, but comforted himself with thinking that his wife was a clever spinner, and what was much more rare, a brave and good woman. Farmer Weatherbeard. There was once upon a time a man and a woman who had an only son, and he was called Jack. The woman thought that it was his duty to go out to service, and told her husband that he was to take him somewhere. "You must get him such a good place that he will become master of all masters," she said. And then she put some food and a roll of tobacco into a bag for them. Well, they went to a great many masters, but all said that they could make the lad as good as they were themselves, but better than that they could not make him. When the man came home to the old woman with this answer, she said, I shall be equally well pleased whatever you do with him. But this I do say, that you are to have him made a master over all masters." Then she once more put some food and a roll of tobacco into the bag, and the man and his son had to set out again. When they had walked some distance, they got upon the ice, and there they met a man in a carriage who was driving a black horse. "Where are you going?" he said. "I have to go and get my son apprenticed to someone who will be able to teach him a trade, for my old woman comes of such well-to-do folk that she insists on his being taught to be master of all masters," said the man. "We are not ill met, then," said the man who was driving, "for I am the kind of man who can do that, and I am just looking out for such an apprentice. Get up behind with you," he said to the boy, and off the horse went with them straight up into the air. "No, no, wait a little," screamed the father of the boy. "I ought to know what your name is and where you live." "Oh, I am at home both in the north and the south and the east and the west, and I am called Farmer Weatherbeard," said the master. "You may come here again in a year's time, and then I will tell you if the lad suits me." And then they set off again and were gone. When the man got home, the old woman inquired what had become of the son. "Ah, heaven only knows what has become of him," said the man. They went up aloft, and then he told her what had happened. But when the woman heard that, and found that the man did not at all know either when their son would be out of his apprenticeship or where he had gone, she packed him off again to find out, and gave him a bag of food and a roll of tobacco to take away with him. When he had walked for some time, he came to a great wood, and it stretched before him all day long as he went on. And when night began to fall, he saw a great light, and went towards it. After a long, long time, he came to a small hut at the foot of a rock, outside which an old woman was standing drawing water up from a well with her nose. It was so long. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you too," said the old woman. "No one has called me mother this 100 years." "Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman. But the man took out his roll of tobacco, lighted a little of it, and then gave her a whiff. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and thus the man got leave to stay the night there. It was not long before he asked about Farmer Weatherbeard. She said that she knew nothing about him, but that she ruled over all the 4-footed beasts, and some of them might know him. So she gathered them all together by blowing a whistle, which she had, and questioned them. But there was not one of them which knew anything about Farmer Weatherbeard. "Well," said the old woman, "there are 3 of us sisters. It may be that one of the other 2 knows where he is to be found. You shall have the loan of my horse and carriage, and then you will get there by night. But her house is 300 miles off. Go the nearest way you will." The man set out and got there at night. When he arrived, this old woman also was standing drawing water out of the well with her nose. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the old woman. "No one has ever called me mother this 100 years." "Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman. Then he took out the roll of tobacco, took a whiff, and gave the old woman some snuff on the back of her hand. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and the man got leave to stay all night. It was not long before he began to ask about Farmer Weatherbeard. She knew nothing about him, but she ruled over all the fishes, she said, and perhaps some of them might know something. So she gathered them all together by blowing a whistle, which she had, and questioned them. But there was not one of them which knew anything about Farmer Weatherbeard. "Well," said the old woman, "I have another sister. Perhaps she may know something about him. She lives 600 miles off, but you shall have my horse and carriage, and then you will get there by nightfall." So the man set off, and he got there by nightfall. The old woman was standing raking the fire, and she was doing it with her nose, so long it was. "Good evening, mother," said the man. "Good evening to you," said the old woman. "No one has called me mother this 100 years." "Can I lodge here tonight?" said the man. "No," said the old woman. But the man pulled out his roll of tobacco again, and filled his pipe with some of it, and gave the old woman enough snuff to cover the back of her hand. Then she was so delighted that she began to dance, and the man got leave to stay in her house. It was not long before he asked about Farmer Weatherbeard. She knew nothing at all about him, she said, but she governed all the birds, and she gathered them together with her whistle. When she questioned them all, the eagle was not there, but it came soon afterwards, and when asked, it said that it had just come from Farmer Weatherbeard's. Then the old woman said that it was to guide the man to him, but the eagle would have something to eat first, and then it wanted to wait until the next day, for it was so tired with the long journey that it was scarcely able to rise from the earth. When the eagle had had plenty of food and rest, the old woman plucked a feather out of its tail and set the man in the feather's place, and then the bird flew away with him. But they did not get to Farmer Weatherbeard's before midnight. When they got there, the eagle said, "There are a great many dead bodies lying outside the door, but you must not concern yourself about them. The people who are inside the house are all so sound asleep that it will not be easy to awake them. But you must go straight to the table drawer and take out 3 bits of bread. And if you hear anyone snoring, pluck 3 feathers from his head. He will not waken for that." The man did this. When he had got the bits of bread, he first plucked out 1 feather. "Oof!" screamed Farmer Weatherbeard. So the man plucked out another, and then Farmer Weatherbeard shrieked, "Oof!" again. But when the man had plucked the 3rd, Farmer Weatherbeard screamed so loudly that the man thought that brick and mortar would be rent in twain. But for all that he went on sleeping. And now the eagle told the man what he was to do next, and he did it. He went to the stable door, and there he stumbled against a hard stone, which he picked up, and beneath it lay 3 splinters of wood, which he also picked up. He knocked at the stable door, and it opened at once. He threw down the 3 little bits of bread, and a hare came out and ate them. He caught the hare. Then the eagle told him to pluck 3 feathers out of its tail, and put in the hare, the stone, the splinters of wood, and himself instead of them, and then he would be able to carry them all home. When the eagle had flown a long way, it alighted on a stone. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes, I see a flock of crows coming flying after us," said the man. "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and off it set. In a short time it asked again, "Do you see anything now?" "Yes, now the crows are close behind us," said the man. "Then throw down the 3 feathers which you plucked out of his head," said the eagle. So the man did this, and no sooner had he flung them down than the feathers became a flock of ravens, which chased the crows home again. Then the eagle flew on much farther with the man, but at length it alighted on a stone for a while. "Do you see anything?" it said. "I am not quite certain," said the man, "but I think I see something coming in the far distance." "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and away it went. "Do you see anything now?" it said, after some time had gone by. "Yes, now they are close behind us," said the man. "Then throw down the splinters of wood which you took from beneath the gray stone by the stable door," said the eagle. The man did this, and no sooner had he flung them down than they grew up into a great, thick wood, and Farmer Weatherbeard had to go home for an axe to cut his way through it. So the eagle flew on a long, long way, but then it grew tired and sat down on a fir tree. "Do you see anything?" it asked. "Yes, I am not quite certain," said the man, "but I think I can catch a glimpse of something far, far away." "Then we shall do well to fly on a little farther," said the eagle, and it set off again. "Do you see anything now?" it said after some time had gone by. "Yes, he is close behind us now," said the man. "Then you must fling down the great stone which you took away from the stable door," said the eagle. The man did so, and it turned into a great, high mountain of stone, which Farmer Weatherbeard had to break his way through before he could follow them. But when he had got to the middle of the mountain, he broke one of his legs, so he had to go home to get it put right. While he was doing this, the eagle flew off to the man's home, with him and with the hare, and when they had got home, the man went to the churchyard and had some Christian earth laid upon the hare, and then it turned into his son Jack. When the time came for the fair, the youth turned himself into a light-colored horse and bade his father go to the market with him. "If anyone should come who wants to buy me," said he, "you are to tell him that you want $100 for me, but you must not forget to take off the halter, for if you do, I shall never be able to get away from Farmer Weatherbeard, for he is the man who will come and bargain for me." And thus it happened. A horse dealer came who had a great fancy to bargain for the horse, and the man got $100 for it. But when the bargain was made, and Jack's father had got the money, the horse dealer wanted to have the halter. "That was no part of our bargain," said the man, "and the halter you shall not have, for I have other horses which I shall have to sell." So each of them went his way. But the horse dealer had not got very far with Jack before he resumed his own form again, and when the man got home, he was sitting on the bench by the stove. The next day he changed himself into a brown horse and told his father that he was to set off to market with him. "If a man should come who wants to buy me," said Jack, "you are to tell him that you want $200, for that he will give, and treat you besides. But whatsoever you drink, and whatsoever you do, don't forget to take the halter off me, or you will never see me more." And thus it happened. The man got his $200 for the horse, and was treated as well. And when they parted from each other, it was just as much as he could do to remember to take off the halter. But the buyer had not got far on his way before the youth took his own form again, and when the man reached home, Jack was already sitting on the bench by the stove. On the third day, all happened in the same way. The youth changed himself into a great black horse, and told his father that if a man came and offered him $300 and treated him well and handsomely into the bargain, he was to sell him. But whatsoever he did, or how much soever he drank, he must not forget to take off the halter, or else he himself would never get away from Farmer Weatherbeard as long as he lived. "No," said the man, "I will not forget." When he got to the market, he received the $300, but Farmer Weatherbeard treated him so handsomely that he quite forgot to take off the halter. So Farmer Weatherbeard went away with the horse. "Ah, poor creature, what a master you must have to treat you thus," she said, and pushed the halter off the hook so that the horse might turn round and eat the oats. "I am here!" shrieked Farmer Weatherbeard, rushing out of doors. But the horse had already shaken off the halter and flung himself into a goose pond, where he changed himself into a little fish. Farmer Weatherbeard went after him and changed himself into a great pike. So Jack turned himself into a dove, and Farmer Weatherbeard turned himself into a hawk and flew after the dove and struck it. But a princess was standing at a window in the king's palace, watching the struggle. "If thou didst but know as much as I know, thou wouldst fly into me through the window," said the princess to the dove. So the dove came flying in through the window and changed itself into Jack again, and told her all as it had happened. "Change thyself into a gold ring, and set thyself on my finger," said the princess. "No, that will not do," said Jack, "for then Farmer Weatherbeard will make the king fall sick, and there will be no one who can make him well again before Farmer Weatherbeard comes and cures him, and for that he will demand the gold ring. I will say that it was my mother's, and that I will not part with it," said the princess. So Jack changed himself into a gold ring and set himself on the princess's finger, and Farmer Weatherbeard could not get at him there. But then all that the youth had foretold came to pass. The king became ill, and there was no doctor who could cure him till Farmer Weatherbeard arrived, and he demanded the ring which was on the princess's finger as a reward. So the king sent a messenger to the princess for the ring. She, however, refused to part with it, because she had inherited it from her mother. When the king was informed of this, he fell into a rage, and said that he would have the ring. Let her have inherited it from whom she might. "Well, it's of no use to be angry about it," said the princess, "for I can't get it off. If you want the ring, you will have to take the finger too." "I will try, and then the ring will very soon come off," said Farmer Weatherbeard. "No, thank you. I will try myself," said the princess, and she went away to the fireplace and put some ashes on the ring. So the ring came off and was lost among the ashes. Farmer Weatherbeard changed himself into a hare, which scratched and scraped about in the fireplace after the ring until the ashes were up to its ears. But Jack changed himself into a fox and bit the hare's head off, and if Farmer Weatherbeard was possessed by the evil one, all was now over with him. Mother Holle. Once upon a time, there was a widow who had 2 daughters. One of them was pretty and clever, and the other ugly and lazy. But as the ugly one was her own daughter, she liked her far the best of the 2. And the pretty one had to do all the work of the house, and was in fact the regular maid of all work. Every day she had to sit by a well on the high road and spin till her fingers were so sore that they often bled. One day some drops of blood fell on her spindle, so she dipped it into the well, meaning to wash it. But, as luck would have it, it dropped from her hand and fell right in. She ran weeping to her stepmother and told her what had happened, but she scolded her harshly and was so merciless in her anger that she said, "Well, since you've dropped the spindle down, you must just go after it yourself, and don't let me see your face again until you bring it with you." Then the poor girl returned to the well, and not knowing what she was about, in the despair and misery of her heart, she sprang into the well and sank to the bottom. For a time, she lost all consciousness, and when she came to herself again, she was lying in a lovely meadow, with the sun shining brightly overhead and 1,000 flowers blooming at her feet. She rose up and wandered through this enchanted place till she came to a baker's oven full of bread, and the bread called out to her as she passed, "Oh, take me out, or I shall be burnt to a cinder. I am quite done enough." So she stepped up quickly to the oven and took out all the loaves one after the other. Then she went on a little farther and came to a tree laden with beautiful rosy-cheeked apples, and as she passed by, it called out, "Oh, shake me, my apples are all quite ripe." She did as she was asked, and shook the tree till the apples fell like rain, and none were left hanging. When she had gathered them all up into a heap, she went on her way again, and came at length to a little house, at the door of which sat an old woman. The old dame had such large teeth that the girl felt frightened and wanted to run away. But the old woman called after her, "What are you afraid of, dear child? Stay with me and be my little maid, and if you do your work well, I will reward you handsomely. But you must be very careful how you make my bed. You must shake it well till the feathers fly. Then people in the world below say it snows, for I am Mother Holle." She spoke so kindly that the girl took heart and agreed readily to enter her service. She did her best to please the old woman, and shook her bed with such a will that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. So she led a very easy life, was never scolded, and lived on the fat of the land. But after she had been some time with Mother Holle, she grew sad and depressed, and at first she hardly knew herself what was the matter. At last, she discovered that she was homesick. So she went to Mother Holle and said, "I know I am 1,000 times better off here than I ever was in my life before, but notwithstanding, I have a great longing to go home, in spite of all your kindness to me. I can remain with you no longer, but must return to my own people." "Your desire to go home pleases me," said Mother Holle, "and because you have served me so faithfully, I will show you the way back into the world myself." So she took her by the hand and led her to an open door, and as the girl passed through it, there fell a heavy shower of gold all over her, till she was covered with it from top to toe. "That's a reward for being such a good little maid," said Mother Holle, and she gave her the spindle too that had fallen into the well. Then she shut the door, and the girl found herself back in the world again, not far from her own house. And when she came to the courtyard, the old hen, who sat on the top of the wall, called out, "Click, clock, clack, our golden maid's come back." Then she went in to her stepmother, and as she had returned covered with gold, she was welcomed home. "Oh, take me out, or I shall be burnt to a cinder. I am quite done enough." But the good-for-nothing girl answered, "A pretty joke indeed, just as if I should dirty my hands for you." And on she went. Soon she came to the apple tree, which cried, "Oh, shake me, my apples are all quite ripe." "I'll see myself farther," she replied. "One of them might fall on my head." And so she pursued her way. When she came to Mother Holle's house, she wasn't the least afraid, for she had been warned about her big teeth, and she readily agreed to become her maid. The first day she worked very hard, and did all her mistress told her, for she thought of the gold she would give her. But on the second day she began to be lazy, and on the third she wouldn't even get up in the morning. She didn't make Mother Holle's bed as she ought to have done, and never shook it enough to make the feathers fly. So her mistress soon grew weary of her and dismissed her, much to the lazy creature's delight. For now she thought. "The shower of golden rain will come." Mother Holle led her to the same door as she had done her sister, but when she passed through it, instead of the gold rain, a kettle full of pitch came showering over her. "That's a reward for your service," said Mother Holle, and she closed the door behind her. So the lazy girl came home all covered with pitch, and when the old hen on the top of the wall saw her, it called out, "Click, clock, clack, our dirty slut's come back." But the pitch remained sticking to her, and never as long as she lived could it be got off. Minnikin. There was once upon a time a couple of needy folk who lived in a wretched hut, in which there was nothing but black want, so they had neither food to eat nor wood to burn. But if they had next to nothing of all else, they had the blessing of God so far as children were concerned, and every year brought them one more. The man was not overpleased at this. He was always going about grumbling and growling, and saying that it seemed to him that there might be such a thing as having too many of these good gifts. So, shortly before another baby was born, he went away into the wood for some firewood, saying that he did not want to see the new child. He would hear him quite soon enough when he began to squall for some food. As soon as this baby was born, it began to look about the room. "Ah, my dear mother," said he, "give me some of my brother's old clothes, and food enough for a few days, and I will go out into the world and seek my fortune, for so far as I can see, you have children enough." "Heaven help thee, my son," said the mother. "That will never do. Thou art still far too little." But the little creature was determined to do it, and begged and prayed so long that the mother was forced to let him have some old rags and tie up a little food for him, and then gaily and happily he went out into the world. But almost before he was out of the house, another boy was born, and he too looked about him and said, "Ah, my dear mother, give me some of my brother's old clothes and food for some days, and then I will go out into the world and find my twin brother, for you have children enough." "Heaven help thee, little creature, thou art far too little for that," said the woman. "It would never do." But she spoke to no purpose, for the boy begged and prayed until he had got some old rags and a bundle of provisions, and then he set out manfully into the world to find his twin brother. When the younger had walked for some time, he caught sight of his brother a short distance in front of him, and called to him and bade him to stop. "Wait a minute," he said. "You are walking as if for a wager, but you ought to have stayed to see your younger brother before you hurried off into the world." So the elder stood still and looked back, and when the younger had got up to him and had told him that he was his brother, he said, "But now let us sit down and see what kind of food our mother has given us." And that they did. When they had walked on a little farther, they came to a brook which ran through a green meadow. And there the younger said that they ought to christen each other. "As we had to make such haste, and had no time to do it at home, we may as well do it here," said he. "What will you be called?" asked the elder. "I will be called Minnikin," answered the second. "And you, what will you be called?" "I will be called King Pippin," answered the elder. They christened each other, and then went onwards. When they had walked for some time, they came to a crossway, and there they agreed to part, and each take his own road. This they did, but no sooner had they walked a short distance than they met again. So they parted once more, and each took his own road. But in a very short time, the same thing happened again. They met each other before they were at all aware. And so it happened the third time also. Then they arranged with each other that each should choose his own quarter, and one should go east and the other west. "But if ever you fall into any need or trouble," said the elder, "call me thrice, and I will come and help you. Only you must not call me until you are in the utmost need." "In that case, we shall not see each other for some time," said Minnikin. So they bade farewell to each other, and Minnikin went east and King Pippin went west. When Minnikin had walked a long way alone, he met an old crook-backed hag who had only one eye. Minnikin stole it. "Oh, oh!" cried the old hag. "What has become of my eye?" "What will you give me to get your eye back?" said Minnikin. "I will give thee a sword, which is such a sword that it can conquer a whole army, let it be ever so great," replied the woman. "Let me have it then," said Minnikin. The old hag gave him the sword, so she got her eye back. Then Minnikin went onwards, and when he had wandered on for some time, he again met an old crook-backed hag who had only one eye. Minnikin stole it before she was aware. "Oh, oh! What has become of my eye?" cried the old hag. "What will you give me to get your eye back?" said Minnikin. "I will give thee a ship which can sail over fresh water and salt water, over high hills and deep dales," answered the old woman. "Let me have it then," said Minnikin. So the old woman gave him a little bit of a ship which was no bigger than he could put in his pocket, and then she got her eye back, and she went her way and Minnikin his. When he had walked on for a long time, he met for the third time an old crook-backed hag who had only one eye. This eye also Minnikin stole, and when the woman screamed and lamented and asked what had become of her eye, Minnikin said, "What will you give me to get your eye back? I will give thee the art to brew 100 lasts of malt in one brewing." So, for teaching that art, the old hag got her eye back, and they both went away by different roads. But when Minnikin had walked a short distance, it seemed to him that it might be worth while to see what his ship could do. So he took it out of his pocket, and first he put one foot into it, and then the other. And no sooner had he put one foot into the ship than it became much larger. And when he set the other foot into it, it grew as large as ships that sail on the sea. Then Minnikin said, "Now go over fresh water and salt water, over high hills and deep dales, and do not stop until thou comest to the king's palace." And in an instant the ship went away as swiftly as any bird in the air, till it got just below the king's palace. And there it stood still. From the windows of the king's palace, many persons had seen Minnikin come sailing thither, and had stood to watch him. And they were all so astounded that they ran down to see what manner of man this could be, who came sailing in a ship through the air. But while they were running down from the king's palace, Minnikin had got out of the ship and had put it in his pocket again. For the moment he got out of it, it once more became as small as it had been when he got it from the old woman, and those who came from the king's palace could see nothing but a ragged little boy who was standing down by the seashore. The king asked where he had come from, but the boy said he did not know, nor yet could he tell them how he had got there, but he begged very earnestly and prettily for a place in the king's palace. If there was nothing else for him to do, he said he would fetch wood and water for the kitchen maid, and that he obtained leave to do. When Minnikin went up to the king's palace, he saw that everything there was hung with black, both outside and inside, from the bottom to the top. So he asked the kitchen maid what that meant. "Oh, I will tell you that," answered the kitchen maid. "The king's daughter was long ago promised away to 3 trolls, and next Thursday evening one of them is to come to fetch her. Ritter Red has said that he will be able to set her free, but who knows whether he will be able to do it. So you may easily imagine what grief and distress we are in here." So when Thursday evening came, Ritter Red accompanied the princess to the seashore, for there she was to meet the troll, and Ritter Red was to stay with her and protect her. He, however, was very unlikely to do the troll much injury, for no sooner had the princess seated herself by the seashore than Ritter Red climbed up into a great tree which was standing there, and hid himself as well as he could among the branches. The princess wept and begged him most earnestly not to go and leave her, but Ritter Red did not concern himself about that. "It is better that one should die than 2, said he. In the meantime, Minnikin begged the kitchen maid very prettily to give him leave to go down to the strand for a short time. "Oh, what could you do down at the strand?" said the kitchen maid. "You have nothing to do there." "Oh yes, my dear, just let me go," said Minnikin. "I should so like to go and amuse myself with the other children." "Well, well, go then," said the kitchen maid, "but don't let me find you staying there over the time when the pan has to be set on the fire for supper, and the roast put on the spit. And mind you bring back a good big armful of wood for the kitchen." Minnikin promised this, and ran down to the seashore. Just as he got to the place where the king's daughter was sitting, the troll came rushing up with a great whistling and whirring, and he was so big and stout that he was terrible to see, and he had 5 heads. "Fire!" screeched the troll. "Can you fight?" roared the troll. "If not, I can learn," said Minnikin. So the troll struck at him with a great thick iron bar which he had in his fist, till the sods flew 5 yards up into the air. "Fie," said Minnikin, "that was not much of a blow. Now you shall see one of mine." So he grasped the sword which he had got from the old crook-backed woman and slashed at the troll so that all 5 heads went flying away over the sands. When the princess saw that she was delivered, she was so delighted that she did not know what she was doing, and skipped and danced. "Come and sleep a bit with your head in my lap," she said to Minnikin, and as he slept, she put a golden dress on him. But when Ritter Red saw that there was no longer any danger afoot, he lost no time in creeping down from the tree. He then threatened the princess, until at length she was forced to promise to say that it was he who had rescued her, for he told her that if she did not, he would kill her. Then he took the troll's lungs and tongue and put them in his pocket handkerchief, and led the princess back to the king's palace, and whatsoever had been lacking to him in the way of honor before was lacking no longer, for the king did not know how to exalt him enough, and always set him on his own right hand at table. As for Minnikin, first he went out on the troll's ship, and took a great quantity of gold and silver hoops away with him, and then he trotted back to the king's palace. When the kitchen maid caught sight of all this gold and silver, she was quite amazed, and said, "My dear friend Minnikin, where have you got all that from?" For she was half afraid that he had not come by it honestly. "Oh," answered Minnikin, "I have been home a while, and these hoops had fallen off some of our buckets, so I brought them away with me for you." So when the kitchen maid heard that they were for her, she asked no more questions about the matter. She thanked Minnikin, and everything was right again at once. Next Thursday evening all went just the same, and everyone was full of grief and affliction. But Ritter Red said that he had been able to deliver the king's daughter from one troll, so that he could very easily deliver her from another, and he led her down to the seashore. But he did not do much harm to this troll either, for when the time came when the troll might be expected, he said as he had said before, "It is better that one should die than two," and then climbed up into the tree again. Minnikin once more begged the cook's leave to go down to the seashore for a short time. "Oh, what can you do there?" said the cook. "My dear, do let me go," said Minnikin. "I should so like to go down there and amuse myself a little with the other children." So this time also she said that he should have leave to go, but he must first promise that he would be back by the time the joint was turned, and that he would bring a great armful of wood with him. No sooner had Minnikin got down to the strand than the troll came rushing along with a great whistling and whirring, and he was twice as big as the first troll, and he had 10 heads. "Fire!" shrieked the troll. "Can you fight?" roared the troll. "If not, I can learn," said Minnikin. So the troll struck at him with his iron club, which was still bigger than that which the first troll had had, so that the earth flew 10 yards up in the air. "Fie," said Minnikin, "that was not much of a blow. Now you shall see one of my blows." Then he grasped his sword and struck at the troll, so that all his 10 heads danced away over the sands. And again the king's daughter said to him, "Sleep a while on my lap." And while Minnikin lay there, she drew some silver raiment over him. As soon as Ritter Red saw that there was no longer any danger afoot, he crept down from the tree and threatened the princess, until at last she was again forced to promise to say that it was he who had rescued her. After which he took the tongue and the lungs of the troll and put them in his pocket handkerchief, and then he conducted the princess back to the palace. There was joy and gladness in the palace, as may be imagined, and the king did not know how to show enough honor and respect to Ritter Red. Minnikin, however, took home with him an armful of gold and silver hoops from the troll's ship. When he came back to the king's palace, the kitchen maid clapped her hands and wondered where he could have got all that gold and silver. But Minnikin answered that he had been home for a short time, and that it was only the hoops which had fallen off some pails, and that he had brought them away for the kitchen maid. When the third Thursday evening came, everything happened exactly as it had happened on the 2 former occasions. Everything in the king's palace was hung with black, and everyone was sorrowful and distressed. But Ritter Red said that he did not think that they had much reason to be afraid. He had delivered the king's daughter from 2 trolls, so he could easily deliver her from the third as well. He led her down to the strand, but when the time drew near for the troll to come, he climbed up into the tree again and hid himself. The princess wept and entreated him to stay, but all to no purpose. He stuck to his old speech. "It is better that one life should be lost than 2. This evening also, Minnikin begged for leave to go down to the seashore. "Oh, what can you do there?" answered the kitchen maid. However, he begged until at last he got leave to go, but he was forced to promise that he would be back again in the kitchen when the roast had to be turned. Almost immediately after he had got down to the seashore, the troll came with a great whizzing and whirring, and he was much, much bigger than either of the 2 former ones, and he had 15 heads. "Fire!" roared the troll. "Can you fight?" screamed the troll. "If not, I can learn," said Minnikin. "I will teach you," yelled the troll, and struck at him with his iron club, so that the earth flew up 15 yards high into the air. "Fie," said Minnikin, "that was not much of a blow. Now I will let you see one of my blows." So saying, he grasped his sword and cut at the troll in such a way that all his 15 heads danced away over the sands. Then the princess was delivered, and she thanked Minnikin and blessed him for saving her. "Sleep a while now on my lap," said she, and while he lay there she put a garment of brass upon him. "But now, how shall we have it made known that it was you who saved me?" said the king's daughter. "That I will tell you," answered Minnikin. "When Ritter Red has taken you home again and given out that it was he who rescued you, he will, as you know, have you to wife and half the kingdom. But when they ask you on your wedding day whom you will have to be your cup-bearer, you must say, 'I will have the ragged boy who is in the kitchen and carries wood and water for the kitchen maid. And when I am filling your cups for you, I will spill a drop upon his plate, but none upon yours. And then he will be angry and strike me, and this will take place thrice. But the third time you must say, Shame on you thus to smite the beloved of mine heart. It is he who delivered me from the troll, and he is the one whom I will have." Then Minnikin ran back to the king's palace as he had done before. But first he went on board the troll's ship and took a great quantity of gold and silver and other precious things. And out of these he once more gave to the kitchen maid a whole armful of gold and silver hoops. No sooner did Ritter Red see that all danger was over than he crept down from the tree and threatened the king's daughter till he made her promise to say that he had rescued her. Then he conducted her back to the king's palace, and if honor enough had not been done him before, it was certainly done now. For the king had no other thought than how to make much of the man who had saved his daughter from the 3 trolls. And it was settled then that Ritter Red should marry her and receive half the kingdom. On the wedding day, however, the princess begged that she might have the little boy who was in the kitchen and carried wood and water for the kitchen maid to fill the wine cups at the wedding feast. "Oh, what can you want with that dirty, ragged boy in here?" said Ritter Red. But the princess said that she insisted on having him as cupbearer and would have no one else. And at last she got leave, and then everything was done as had been agreed on between the princess and Minnikin. He spilt a drop on Ritter Red's plate, but none upon hers. And each time that he did it, Ritter Red fell into a rage and struck him. At the first blow, all the ragged garments which he had worn in the kitchen fell from off Minnikin. At the second blow, the brass garments fell off, and at the third, the silver raiment. And there he stood in the golden raiment, which was so bright and splendid that light flashed from it. Then the king's daughter said, "Shame on you thus to smite the beloved of my heart. It is he who delivered me from the troll, and he is the one whom I will have." Ritter Red swore that he was the man who had saved her, but the king said, "He who delivered my daughter must have some token in proof of it." So Ritter Red ran off at once for his handkerchief with the lungs and tongue, and Minnikin went and brought all the gold and silver and precious things which he had taken out of the trolls' ships, and they each of them laid these tokens before the king. "He who has such precious things in gold and silver and diamonds," said the king, "must be the one who killed the troll, for such things are not to be had anywhere else." So Ritter Red was thrown into the snake pit, and Minnikin was to have the princess and half the kingdom. One day the king went out walking with Minnikin, And Minnikin asked him if he had never had any other children. "Yes," said the king. "I had another daughter, but the troll carried her away because there was no one who could deliver her. You are going to have one daughter of mine, but if you can set free the other, who has been taken by the troll, you shall willingly have her too, and the other half of the kingdom as well." "I may as well make the attempt," said Minnikin, "but I must have an iron rope which is 500 ells long, and then I must have 500 men with me, and provisions for 5 weeks, for I have a long voyage before me." So the king said he should have these things, but the king was afraid that he had no ship large enough to carry them all. "But I have a ship of my own," said Minnikin, and he took the one which the old woman had given him out of his pocket. The king laughed at him and thought that it was only one of his jokes, but Minnikin begged him just to give him what he had asked for, and then he should see something. Then all that Minnikin had asked for was brought, and first he ordered them to lay the cable in the ship, but there was no one who was able to lift it, and there was only room for 1 or 2 men at a time in the little bit of a ship. Then Minnikin himself took hold of the cable and laid 1 or 2 links of it into the ship, and as he threw the links into it, the ship grew bigger and bigger, and at last it was so large that the cable and the 500 men and provisions and Minnikin himself had room enough. "Now go over fresh water and salt water, over hill and dale, and do not stop until thou comest to where the king's daughter is," said Minnikin to the ship, and off it went in a moment over land and water till the wind whistled and moaned all round about it. When they had sailed thus a long, long way, the ship stopped short in the middle of the sea. "Ah, now we have got there," said Minnikin. "But how we are to get back again is a very different thing." Then he took the cable and tied one end of it round his body. "Now I must go to the bottom," he said, "but when I give a good jerk to the cable and want to come up again, you must all pull like one man, or there will be an end of all life, both for you and for me." So saying, he sprang into the water, and yellow bubbles rose up all around him. He sank lower and lower, and at last he came to the bottom. There he saw a large hill with a door in it, and in he went. When he had got inside, he found the other princess sitting sewing, but when she saw Minnikin, she clapped her hands. "Ah, heaven be praised," she cried. "I have not seen a Christian man since I came here." "I have come for you," said Minnikin. "Alas, you will not be able to get me," said the king's daughter. "It is no use even to think of that. If the troll catches sight of you, he will take your life." "You had better tell me about him," said Minnikin. "Where is he gone? It would be amusing to see him." So the king's daughter told Minnikin that the troll was out trying to get hold of someone who could brew 100 lasts of malt at one brewing, for there was to be a feast at the troll's, at which less than that would not be drunk. "I can do that," said Minnikin. "Ah, if only the troll were not so quick-tempered, I might have told him that," answered the princess. "But he is so ill-natured that he will tear you to pieces, I fear, as soon as he comes in. But I will try to find some way of doing it. Can you hide yourself here in the cupboard? And then we will see what happens." Minnikin did this, and almost before he had crept into the cupboard and hidden himself, came the troll. "Hoof, what a smell of Christian man's blood," said the troll. "Yes, a bird flew over the roof with a Christian man's bone in his bill and let it fall down our chimney," answered the princess. "I made haste enough to get it away again, but it must be that which smells. So, notwithstanding." "Yes, it must be that," said the troll. Then the princess asked if he had got hold of anyone who could brew 100 lasts of malt at one brewing. "No, there is no one who can do it," said the troll. "A short time since there was a man here who said he could do it," said the king's daughter. "How clever you always are," said the troll. "How could you let him go away? You must have known that I was just wanting a man of that kind." "Well, but I didn't let him go, after all," said the princess. "But father is so quick-tempered, so I hid him in the cupboard. But if father has not found anyone, then the man is still here." "Let him come in," said the troll. When Minnikin came, the troll asked if it were true that he could brew 100 lasts of malt at one brewing. "Yes," said Minnikin, "it is." "It is well, then, that I have lighted on thee," said the troll. "Fall to work this very minute, but heaven help thee if thou dost not brew the ale strong." "Oh, it shall taste well," said Minnikin, and at once set himself to work to brew. "But I must have more trolls to help to carry what is wanted," said Minnikin. "These that I have are good for nothing." So he got more and so many that there was a swarm of them, and then the brewing went on. When the sweet wort was ready, they were all, as a matter of course, anxious to taste it. First the troll himself and then the others. But Minnikin had brewed the wort so strong that they all fell down dead, like so many flies, as soon as they had drunk any of it. At last there was no one left but one wretched old hag, who was lying behind the stove. "Oh, poor old creature," said Minnikin, "you shall have a taste of the wort too, like the rest." So he went away and scooped up a little from the bottom of the brewing vat in a milk pan and gave it to her. And then he was quit of the whole of them. While Minnikin was now standing there looking about him, he cast his eye on a large chest. This he took and filled it with gold and silver, and then he tied the cable round himself and the princess and the chest, and tugged at the rope with all his might, whereupon his men drew them up safe and sound. As soon as Minnikin had got safely on his ship again, he said, "Now go over salt water and fresh water, over hill and dale, and do not stop until thou comest unto the king's palace." And in a moment the ship went off so fast that the yellow foam rose up all round about it. When those who were in the king's palace saw the ship, they lost no time in going to meet him with song and music, and thus they marched up towards Minnikin with great rejoicings. But the gladdest of all was the king, for now he had got his other daughter back again. But now Minnikin was not happy, for both the princesses wanted to have him, and he wanted to have none other than the one whom he had first saved, and she was the younger. For this cause he was continually walking backwards and forwards, thinking how he could contrive to get her, and yet do nothing that was unkind to her sister. One day when he was walking about and thinking of this, it came into his mind that if he only had his brother, King Pippin, with him, who was so like himself that no one could distinguish the one from the other, he could let him have the elder princess and half the kingdom. As for himself, he thought, the other half was quite enough. As soon as this thought occurred to him, he went outside the palace and called for King Pippin, but no one came. So he called a second time, and a little louder, but no. Still no one came. So Minnikin called for the third time, and with all his might, and there stood his brother by his side. "I told you that you were not to call me unless you were in the utmost need," he said to Minnikin, "and there is not even so much as a midge here who can do you any harm." And with that he gave Minnikin such a blow that he rolled over on the grass. "Shame on you to strike me," said Minnikin. "First have I won one princess and half the kingdom, and then the other princess and the other half of the kingdom. And now, when I was just thinking that I would give you one of the princesses and one of the halves of the kingdom, do you think you have any reason to give me such a blow?" When King Pippin heard that, he begged his brother's pardon, and they were reconciled at once and became good friends. "Now, as you know," said Minnikin, "we are so like each other that no one can tell one of us from the other. So just change clothes with me and go up to the palace, and then the princesses will think that I am coming in. And the one who kisses you first shall be yours, and I will have the other." For he knew that the elder princess was the stronger, so he could very well guess how things would go. King Pippin at once agreed to this. He changed clothes with his brother and went into the palace. When he entered the princesses' apartments, they believed that he was Minnikin, and both of them ran up to him at once. But the elder, who was bigger and stronger, pushed her sister aside and threw her arms round King Pippin's neck and kissed him. So he got her to wife, and Minnikin, the younger sister. It will be easy to understand that 2 weddings took place, and they were so magnificent that they were heard of and talked about all over 7 kingdoms. Bushy Bride. There was once on a time a widower who had a son and a daughter by his first wife. They were both good children and loved each other with all their hearts. After some time had gone by, the man married again, and he chose a widow with one daughter who was ugly and wicked, and her mother was ugly and wicked too. From the very day that the new wife came into the house, there was no peace for the man's children, and not a corner to be found where they could get any rest. So the boy thought that the best thing he could do was to go out into the world and try to earn his own bread. When he had roamed about for some time, he came to the king's palace, where he obtained a place under the coachman. And very brisk and active he was, and the horses that he looked after were so fat and sleek that they shone again. But his sister, who was still at home, fared worse and worse. Both her stepmother and her stepsister were always finding fault with her, whatsoever she did and whithersoever she went, and they scolded her and abused her, so that she never had an hour's peace. They made her do all the hard work, and hard words fell to her lot early and late, but little enough food accompanied them. One day they sent her to the brook to fetch some water home, and an ugly and horrible head rose up out of the water and said, "Wash me, girl." "Yes, I will wash you with pleasure," said the girl, and began to wash and scrub the ugly face. But she couldn't help thinking that it was a very unpleasant piece of work. When she had done it, and done it well, another head rose up out of the water, and this one was uglier still. "Brush me, girl," said the head. "Yes, I will brush you with pleasure," said the girl, and set to work with the tangled hair. And as may be easily imagined, this too was by no means pleasant work. When she had got it done, another and a much more ugly and horrible-looking head rose up out of the water. "Kiss me, girl," said the head. "Yes, I will kiss you," said the man's daughter, and she did it. But she thought it was the worst bit of work that she had ever had to do in her life. So the heads all began to talk to each other, and to ask what they should do for this girl who was so full of kindliness. "She shall be the prettiest girl that ever was, and fair and bright as the day," said the first head. "Gold shall drop from her hair whenever she brushes it," said the second. "Gold shall drop from her mouth whenever she speaks," said the third head. So when the man's daughter went home, looking as beautiful and bright as day, the stepmother and her daughter grew much more ill-tempered, and it was worse still when she began to talk, and they saw that golden coins dropped from her mouth. The stepmother fell into such a towering passion that she drove the man's daughter into the pigsty. She might stay there with her fine show of gold, the stepmother said, but she should not be permitted to set foot in the house. It was not long before the mother wanted her own daughter to go to the stream to fetch some water. When she got there with her pails, the first head rose up out of the water close to the bank. "Wash me, girl," it said. "Wash yourself," answered the woman's daughter. Then the second head appeared. "Brush me, girl," said the head. "Brush yourself," said the woman's daughter. So down it went to the bottom, and the third head came up. "Kiss me, girl," said the head. "As if I would kiss your ugly mouth," said the girl. So again the heads talked together about what they should do for this girl who was so ill-tempered and full of her own importance, and they agreed that she should have a nose that was 4 ells long, and a jaw that was 3 ells, and a fur bush in the middle of her forehead, and every time she spoke, ashes should fall from her mouth. When she came back to the cottage door with her pails, she called to her mother who was inside. Open the door yourself, my own dear child," said the mother. "I can't get near because of my nose," said the daughter. When the mother came and saw her, you may imagine what a state of mind she was in, and how she screamed and lamented. But neither the nose nor the jaw grew any the less for that. Now the brother, who was in service in the king's palace, had taken a portrait of his sister, and he had carried the picture away with him, and every morning and evening he knelt down before it and prayed for his sister, so dearly did he love her. The other stable boys had heard him doing this, so they peeped through the keyhole into his room and saw that he was kneeling there before a picture. So they told everyone that every morning and evening the youth knelt down and prayed to an idol which he had. And at last they went to the king himself and begged that he too would peep through the keyhole and see for himself what the youth did. At first the king would not believe this, but after a long time they prevailed with him, and he crept on tiptoe to the door, peeped through, and saw the youth on his knees, with his hands clasped together before a picture which was hanging on the wall. "Open the door," cried the king, but the youth did not hear. So the king called to him again, but the youth was praying so fervently that he did not hear him this time either. "Open the door, I say," cried the king again. "It is I. I want to come in." So the youth sprang to the door and unlocked it, but in his haste he forgot to hide the picture. When the king entered and saw it, he stood still as if he were in fetters, and could not stir from the spot, for the picture seemed to him so beautiful. "There is nowhere on earth so beautiful a woman as this," said the king. But the youth told him that she was his sister, and that he had painted her, and that if she was not prettier than the picture, she was at all events not uglier. "Well, if she is as beautiful as that, I will have her for my queen," said the king, and he commanded the youth to go home and fetch her without a moment's delay, and to lose no time in coming back. The youth promised to make all the haste he could, and set forth from the king's palace. When the brother arrived at home to fetch his sister, her stepmother and stepsister would go too. So they all set out together, And the man's daughter took with her a casket in which she kept her gold, and a dog which was called Little Snow. These two things were all that she had inherited from her mother. When they had traveled for some time, they had to cross the sea. And the brother sat down at the helm, and the mother and the two half-sisters went to the fore part of the vessel, and they sailed a long, long way. At last they came in sight of land. "Look at that white strand there. That is where we shall land," said the brother, pointing across the sea. "What is my brother saying?" inquired the man's daughter. "He says that you are to throw your casket out into the sea," answered the stepmother. "Well, if my brother says so, I must do it," said the man's daughter, and she flung her casket into the sea. When they had sailed for some time longer, the brother once more pointed over the sea. "There you may see the palace to which we are bound," said he. "What is my brother saying?" asked the man's daughter. "Now he says that you are to throw your dog into the sea," answered the stepmother. The man's daughter wept and was sorely troubled, for Little Snow was the dearest thing she had on earth. But at last she threw him overboard. "If my brother says that, I must do it, but heaven knows how unwilling I am to throw thee out, Little Snow," said she. So they sailed onwards a long way farther. "There mayst thou see the king coming out to meet thee," said the brother, pointing to the seashore. "What is my brother saying?" asked his sister again. But when they arrived at the palace, and the king beheld the ugly bride with a nose that was 4 ells long, a jaw that was 3 ells, and a forehead that had a bush in the middle of it, he was quite terrified. But the wedding feast was all prepared, as regarded brewing and baking, and all the wedding guests were sitting waiting. So ugly as she was, the king was forced to take her, but he was very wroth, and none can blame him for that. So he caused the brother to be thrown into a pit full of snakes. On the first Thursday night after this, a beautiful maiden came into the kitchen of the palace, and begged the kitchen maid who slept there to lend her a brush. She begged very prettily, and got it, and then she brushed her hair, and the gold dropped from it. A little dog was with her, and she said to it, "Go out, Little Snow, and see if it will soon be day." This she said thrice, and the third time that she sent out the dog to see, it was very near dawn. Then she was forced to depart, but as she went, she said, "Out on thee, ugly Bushy Bride, sleeping so soft by the young king's side, on sand and stones my bed I make, and my brother sleeps with the cold snake, unpitied and unwept. I shall come twice more, and then never again," said she. In the morning the kitchen maid related what she had seen and heard, and the king said that next Thursday night he himself would watch in the kitchen and see if this were true. And when it had begun to grow dark, he went out into the kitchen to the girl. But though he rubbed his eyes and did everything he could to keep himself awake, it was all in vain. For the Bushy Bride crooned and sang till his eyes were fast closed, and when the beautiful young maiden came, he was sound asleep and snoring. This time also, as before, she borrowed a brush and brushed her hair with it, and the gold dropped down as she did it. And again she sent the dog out 3 times, and when day dawned she departed. But as she was going, she said, as she had said before, "I shall come once more, and then never again." On the 3rd Thursday night, the king once more insisted on keeping watch. Then he set 2 men to hold him. Each of them was to take an arm, and shake him and jerk him by the arm whenever he seemed to be going to fall asleep. And he set 2 men to watch his Bushy Bride. But as the night wore on, the Bushy Bride again began to croon and to sing, so that his eyes began to close and his head to droop on one side. Then came the lovely maiden, and got the brush and brushed her hair till the gold dropped from it, and then she sent her little Snow out to see if it would soon be day. And this she did 3 times. The 3rd time it was just beginning to grow light, and then she said, "Out on thee, ugly Bushy Bride, sleeping so soft by the young king's side, on sand and stones my bed I make, and my brother sleeps with the cold snake, unpitied and unwept. Now I shall never come again," she said, and then she turned to go. But the 2 men who were holding the king by the arms seized his hands and forced a knife into his grasp, and then made him cut her little finger just enough to make it bleed. Thus the true bride was freed. The king then awoke, and she told him all that had taken place, and how her stepmother and stepsister had betrayed her. Then the brother was at once taken out of the snake pit. The snakes had never touched him, and the stepmother and stepsister were flung down into it instead of him. No one can tell how delighted the king was to get rid of that hideous Bushy Bride and get a queen who was bright and beautiful as day itself. And now the real wedding was held, and held in such a way that it was heard of and spoken about all over 7 kingdoms. The king and his bride drove to church, and little Snow was in the carriage too. When the blessing was given, they went home again, and after that I saw no more of them. Snowdrop. Once upon a time, in the middle of winter when the snowflakes were falling like feathers on the earth, a queen sat at a window framed in black ebony and sewed. And as she sewed and gazed out to the white landscape, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell on the snow. Outside, and because the red showed out so well against the white, she thought to herself, "Oh, what wouldn't I give to have a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony?" And her wish was granted. For not long after a little daughter was born to her, with a skin as white as snow, lips and cheeks as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. They called her Snowdrop. And not long after her birth, the queen died. After a year, the king married again. His new wife was a beautiful woman, but so proud and overbearing that she couldn't stand any rival to her beauty. She possessed a magic mirror, and when she used to stand before it gazing at her own reflection and ask, "Mirror, mirror hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" it always replied, "You are most fair, my lady queen, none fairer in the land I ween." Then she was quite happy, for she knew the mirror always spoke the truth. But Snowdrop was growing prettier and prettier every day, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as she could be, and fairer even than the queen herself. One day, when the latter asked her mirror the usual question, it replied, "My lady queen, you are fair, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you." Then the queen flew into the most awful passion and turned every shade of green in her jealousy. From this hour she hated poor Snowdrop like poison, and every day her envy, hatred, and malice grew, for envy and jealousy are like evil weeds which spring up and choke the heart. At last she could endure Snowdrop's presence no longer, and calling a huntsman to her, she said, "Take the child out into the wood, and never let me see her face again. You must kill her, and bring me back her lungs and liver, that I may know for certain she is dead." The huntsman did as he was told and led Snowdrop out into the wood. But as he was in the act of drawing out his knife to slay her, she began to cry and said, "Oh, dear huntsman, spare my life, and I will promise to fly forth into the wide wood and never to return home again." And because she was so young and pretty, the huntsman had pity on her and said, "Well, run along, poor child." For he thought to himself, "The wild beasts will soon eat her up." And his heart felt lighter because he hadn't had to do the deed himself. And as he turned away, a young boar came running past. So he shot it and brought its lungs and liver home to the queen as a proof that Snowdrop was really dead. And the wicked woman had them stewed in salt and ate them up, thinking she had made an end of Snowdrop forever. Now, when the poor child found herself alone in the big wood, the very trees around her seemed to assume strange shapes, and she felt so frightened she didn't know what to do. Then she began to run over the sharp stones and through the bramble bushes, and the wild beasts ran past her, but they did her no harm. She ran as far as her legs would carry her, and as evening approached, she saw a little house, and she stepped inside to rest. Everything was very small in the little house, but cleaner and neater than anything you can imagine. In the middle of the room there stood a little table, covered with a white tablecloth, and 7 little plates and forks and spoons and knives and tumblers. Side by side against the wall there were 7 little beds, covered with snow-white counterpanes. Snowdrop felt so hungry and so thirsty that she ate a bit of bread and a little porridge from each plate and drank a drop of wine out of each tumbler. Then, feeling tired and sleepy, she lay down on one of the beds. But it wasn't comfortable. Then she tried all the others in turn, but one was too long and another too short. And it was only when she got to the 7th that she found one to suit her exactly. So she lay down upon it, said her prayers like a good child, and fell fast asleep. When it got quite dark, the masters of the little house returned. They were 7 dwarfs who worked in the mines, right down deep in the heart of the mountain. They lighted their 7 little lamps, and as soon as their eyes got accustomed to the glare, they saw that someone had been in the room, for all was not in the same order as they had left it. The first said, "Who's been sitting on my little chair?" The second said, "Who's been eating my little loaf?" The third said, "Who's been tasting my porridge?" The fourth said, "Who's been eating out of my little plate?" The fifth said, "Who's been using my little fork?" The sixth said, "Who's been cutting with my little knife?" The seventh said, "Who's been drinking out of my little tumbler?" Then the first dwarf looked round and saw a little hollow in his bed. And he asked again, "Who's been lying on my bed?" The others came running round and cried when they saw their beds, "Somebody has lain on ours too." But when the 7th came to his bed, he started back in amazement, for there he beheld Snowdrop, fast asleep. Then he called the others, who turned their little lamps full on the bed. And when they saw Snowdrop lying there, they nearly fell down with surprise. "Goodness gracious!" they cried. "What a beautiful child!" And they were so enchanted by her beauty that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on in the little bed. But the 7th dwarf slept with his companions 1 hour in each bed, and in this way he managed to pass the night. In the morning, Snowdrop awoke, but when she saw the 7 little dwarfs, she felt very frightened. But they were so friendly and asked her what her name was in such a kind way that she replied, "I am Snowdrop." "Why did you come to our house?" continued the dwarfs. Then she told them how her stepmother had wished her put to death, and how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run the whole day till she had come to their little house. The dwarfs, when they had heard her sad story, asked her, "Will you stay and keep house for us, cook, make the beds, the washing, sew, and knit? And if you give satisfaction and keep everything neat and clean, you shall want for nothing." "Yes," answered Snowdrop, "I will gladly do all you ask." And so she took up her abode with them. Every morning the dwarfs went into the mountain to dig for gold, and in the evening, when they returned home, Snowdrop always had their supper ready for them. But during the day the girl was left quite alone, so the good dwarfs warned her, saying, "Beware of your stepmother. She will soon find out you are here, and whatever you do, don't let anyone into the house." Now the queen, after she thought she had eaten Snowdrop's lungs and liver, never dreamed but that she was once more the most beautiful woman in the world. So, stepping before her mirror one day, she said, "Mirror, mirror hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" And the mirror replied, "My lady queen, you are fair, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you. Snowdrop, who dwells with the 7 little men, is as fair as you, as fair again." When the queen heard these words, she was nearly struck dumb with horror, for the mirror always spoke the truth, and she knew now that the huntsman must have deceived her, and that Snowdrop was still alive. She pondered day and night how she might destroy her, for as long as she felt she had a rival in the land, her jealous heart left her no rest. At last she hit upon a plan. She stained her face and dressed herself up as an old peddler wife, so that she was quite unrecognizable. In this guise she went over the 7 hills, till she came to the house of the 7 dwarfs. There she knocked at the door, calling out at the same time, "Fine wares to sell, fine wares to sell." Snowdrop peeped out of the window and called out, "Good day, mother, what have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," she answered, "laces of every shade and description." And she held one up that was made of some gay-colored silk. "Surely I can let the honest woman in," thought Snowdrop. So she unbarred the door and bought the pretty lace. "Good gracious, child," said the old woman, "what a figure you've got. Come, I'll lace you up properly for once." Snowdrop, suspecting no evil, stood before her and let her lace her bodice up. But the old woman laced her so quickly and so tightly that it took Snowdrop's breath away, and she fell down dead. "Now you are no longer the fairest," said the wicked old woman, and then she hastened away. In the evening the 7 dwarfs came home, and you may think what a fright they got when they saw their dear Snowdrop lying on the floor, as still and motionless as a dead person. They lifted her up tenderly, and when they saw how tightly laced she was, they cut the lace in two, and she began to breathe a little, and gradually came back to life. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "Depend upon it, the old peddler wife was none other than the old queen. In future you must be sure to let no one in, if we are not at home." As soon as the wicked old queen got home, she went straight to her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" And the mirror answered as before, "My lady queen, you are fair, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you. Snowdrop, who dwells with the 7 little men, is as fair as you, as fair again." When she heard this, she became as pale as death, because she saw at once that Snowdrop must be alive again. "This time," she said to herself, "I will think of something that will make an end of her once and for all." And by the witchcraft which she understood so well, she made a poisonous comb. Then she dressed herself up and assumed the form of another old woman. So she went over the 7 hills till she reached the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocking at the door, she called out, "Fine wares for sale." Snowdrop looked out of the window and said, "You must go away, for I may not let anyone in." "But surely you are not forbidden to look out," said the old woman, and she held up the poisonous comb for her to see. It pleased the girl so much that she let herself be taken in and opened the door. When they had settled their bargain, the old woman said, "Now I'll comb your hair properly for you, for once in the way." Poor Snowdrop thought no evil, but hardly had the comb touched her hair than the poison worked, and she fell down unconscious. "Now, my fine lady, you're really done for this time," said the wicked woman, and she made her way home as fast as she could. Fortunately, it was now near evening, and the 7 dwarfs returned home. When they saw Snowdrop lying dead on the ground, they at once suspected that her wicked stepmother had been at work again. So they searched till they found the poisonous comb, and the moment they pulled it out of her head, Snowdrop came to herself again, and told them what had happened. Then they warned her once more to be on her guard, and to open the door to no one. As soon as the queen got home, she went straight to her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror, hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" And it replied as before, "My lady queen, you are fair, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you. Snowdrop, who dwells with the 7 little men, is as fair as you, as fair again." When she heard these words, she literally trembled and shook with rage. Then she went to a little secret chamber, which no one knew of but herself, and there she made a poisonous apple. Outwardly, it looked beautiful, white with red cheeks, so that everyone who saw it longed to eat it, but anyone who might do so would certainly die on the spot. When the apple was quite finished, she stained her face and dressed herself up as a peasant, and so she went over the 7 hills to the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door as usual, but Snowdrop put her head out of the window and called out, "I may not let anyone in. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me to do so." "Are you afraid of being poisoned?" asked the old woman. "See, I will cut this apple in half. I'll eat the white cheek and you can eat the red." But the apple was so cunningly made that only the red cheek was poisonous. Snowdrop longed to eat the tempting fruit, and when she saw that the peasant woman was eating it herself, she couldn't resist the temptation any longer, and stretching out her hand, she took the poisonous half. But hardly had the first bite passed her lips than she fell down dead on the ground. Then the eyes of the cruel queen sparkled with glee, and laughing aloud she cried, "As white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony, this time the dwarfs won't be able to bring you back to life." When she got home, she asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror, hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" And this time it replied, "You are most fair, my lady queen, none fairer in the land, I ween." Then her jealous heart was at rest, at least as much at rest as a jealous heart can ever be. When the little dwarfs came home in the evening, they found Snowdrop lying on the ground, and she neither breathed nor stirred. They lifted her up and looked round everywhere to see if they could find anything poisonous about. They unlaced her bodice, combed her hair, washed her with water and wine, but all in vain. The child was dead, and remained dead. Then they placed her on a bier, and all the 7 dwarfs sat round it, weeping and sobbing for 3 whole days. At last they made up their minds to bury her, but she looked as blooming as a living being, and her cheeks were still such a lovely color that they said, "We can't hide her away in the black ground." So they had a coffin made of transparent glass, and they laid her in it, and wrote on the lid in golden letters that she was a royal princess. Then they put the coffin on the top of the mountain, and one of the dwarves always remained beside it, and kept watch over it. And the very birds of the air came and bewailed Snowdrop's death, first an owl, and then a raven, and last of all a little dove. Snowdrop lay a long time in the coffin, and she always looked the same, just as if she were fast asleep, and she remained as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. Now it happened one day that a prince came to the wood and passed by the dwarf's house. He saw the coffin on the hill, with the beautiful Snowdrop inside it. And when he had read what was written on it in golden letters, he said to the dwarf, "Give me the coffin. I'll give you whatever you like for it." But the dwarf said, "No, we wouldn't part with it for all the gold in the world." "Well then," he replied, "give it to me, because I can't live without Snowdrop. I will cherish and love it as my dearest possession." He spoke so sadly that the good dwarfs had pity on him and gave him the coffin, and the prince made his servants bear it away on their shoulders. Now it happened that as they were going down the hill, they stumbled over a bush and jolted the coffin so violently that the poisonous bit of apple Snowdrop had swallowed fell out of her throat. She gradually opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, and sat up, alive and well. "Oh, dear me, where am I?" she cried. The prince answered joyfully, "You are with me." And he told her all that had happened, adding, "I love you better than anyone in the whole wide world. Will you come with me to my father's palace and be my wife?" Snowdrop consented and went with him, and the marriage was celebrated with great pomp and splendor. Now Snowdrop's wicked stepmother was one of the guests invited to the wedding feast. When she had dressed herself very gorgeously for the occasion, she went to the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror, hanging there, who in all the land's most fair?" And the mirror answered, "My lady queen, you are fair, 'tis true, but Snowdrop is fairer far than you." When the wicked woman heard these words, she uttered a curse, and was beside herself with rage and mortification. At first, she didn't want to go to the wedding at all, but at the same time, she felt she would never be happy till she had seen the young queen. As she entered, Snowdrop recognized her and nearly fainted with fear. But red-hot iron shoes had been prepared for the wicked old queen, and she was made to get into them and dance till she fell down dead. The Golden Goose. There was once a man who had 3 sons. The youngest of them was called Dullhead, and was sneered and jeered at and snubbed on every possible opportunity. One day it happened that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he started, his mother gave him a fine, rich cake and a bottle of wine, so that he might be sure not to suffer from hunger or thirst. When he reached the forest, he met a little old gray man, who wished him good morning, and said, "Do give me a piece of that cake you have got in your pocket, and let me have a draught of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." Then the second son went to the forest, and his mother gave him a good cake and a bottle of wine, as she had to his elder brother. He too met the little old gray man, who begged him for a morsel of cake and a draught of wine. So then Dullhead said, "Father, let me go out and cut wood." But his father answered, "Both your brothers have injured themselves. You had better leave it alone. You know nothing about it." When he got to the forest, he too met the little gray old man, who greeted him and said, "Give me a piece of your cake and a draught from your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty." And Dullhead replied, "I've only got a cinder cake and some sour beer, but if you care to have that, let us sit down and eat." So they sat down, and when Dullhead brought out his cake, he found it had turned into a fine, rich cake, and the sour beer into excellent wine. Then they ate and drank, and when they had finished, the little man said, "Now I will bring you luck, because you have a kind heart and are willing to share what you have with others. There stands an old tree. Cut it down, and amongst its roots you'll find something." With that, the little man took leave. Then Dullhead fell to at once to hew down the tree, and when it fell, he found amongst its roots a goose, whose feathers were all of pure gold. He lifted it out, carried it off, and took it with him to an inn where he meant to spend the night. Now the landlord of the inn had 3 daughters, and when they saw the goose, they were filled with curiosity as to what this wonderful bird could be, and each longed to have one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought to herself, "No doubt I shall soon find a good opportunity to pluck out one of its feathers." And the first time Dullhead happened to leave the room, she caught hold of the goose by its wing. But, lo and behold, her fingers seemed to stick fast to the goose, and she could not take her hand away. Soon after, the second daughter came in and thought to pluck a golden feather for herself, too. But hardly had she touched her sister than she stuck fast as well. At last, the third sister came with the same intentions, but the other 2 cried out, "Keep off! For heaven's sake, keep off!" The younger sister could not imagine why she was to keep off, and thought to herself, "If they are both there, why should not I be there too?" So she sprang to them, but no sooner had she touched one of them than she stuck fast to her. So they all 3 had to spend the night with the goose. Next morning, Dullhead tucked the goose under his arm and went off, without in the least troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging on to it. They just had to run after him right or left as best they could. In the middle of a field, they met the parson, and when he saw this procession, he cried, "For shame, you bold girls! What do you mean by running after a young fellow through the fields like that? Do you call that proper behavior?" And with that he caught the youngest girl by the hand to try and draw her away. But directly he touched her, he hung on himself and had to run along with the rest of them. Not long after, the clerk came that way and was much surprised to see the parson following the footsteps of 3 girls. "Why, where is your reverence going so fast?" cried he. "Don't forget there is to be a christening today." And he ran after him, caught him by the sleeve, and hung on to it himself. As the 5 of them trotted along in this fashion, one after the other, 2 peasants were coming from their work with their hoes. On seeing them, the parson called out and begged them to come and rescue him and the clerk. But no sooner did they touch the clerk than they stuck on too. And so there were 7 of them running after Dullhead and his goose. After a time, They all came to a town where a king reigned, whose daughter was so serious and solemn that no one could ever manage to make her laugh. So, the king had decreed that whoever should succeed in making her laugh should marry her. When Dullhead heard this, he marched before the princess with his goose and its appendages. And as soon as she saw these 7 people continually running after each other, she burst out laughing and could not stop herself. Then Dullhead claimed her as his bride, but the king, who did not much fancy him as a son-in-law, made all sorts of objections, and told him he must first find a man who could drink up a whole cellarful of wine. Dullhead bethought him of the little gray man, who could, he felt sure, help him. So he went off to the forest, and on the very spot where he had cut down the tree, he saw a man sitting with a most dismal expression of face. Dullhead asked him what he was taking so much to heart, and the man answered, "I don't know how I am ever to quench this terrible thirst I am suffering from. Cold water doesn't suit me at all. To be sure, I've emptied a whole barrel of wine, but what is one drop on a hot stone? I think I can help you," said Dullhead. "Come with me, and you shall drink to your heart's content." So he took him to the king's cellar, and the man sat down before the huge casks, and drank till he drank up the whole contents of the cellar before the day closed. Then Dullhead asked once more for his bride, but the king felt vexed at the idea of a stupid fellow whom people called Dullhead carrying off his daughter, and he began to make fresh conditions. He required Dullhead to find a man who could eat a mountain of bread. Dullhead did not wait to consider long, but went straight off to the forest, and there on the same spot sat a man who was drawing in a strap as tight as he could round his body, and making a most woeful face the while. Said he, "I've eaten up a whole oven full of loaves, but what's the good of that to anyone who is as hungry as I am? I declare my stomach feels quite empty, and I must draw my belt tight if I'm not to die of starvation." Dullhead was delighted, and said, "Get up and come with me, and you shall have plenty to eat." And he brought him to the king's court. Now the king had given orders to have all the flour in his kingdom brought together, and to have a huge mountain baked of it. But the man from the wood just took up his stand before the mountain and began to eat, and in one day it had all vanished. For the 3rd time Dullhead asked for his bride, but again the king tried to make some evasion, and demanded a ship which could sail on land or water. "When you come sailing in such a ship," said he, "you shall have my daughter without further delay." Again Dullhead started off to the forest, and there he found the little old gray man with whom he had shared his cake, and who said, "I have eaten and I have drunk for you, and now I will give you the ship. I have done all this for you because you were kind and merciful to me." Then he gave Dullhead a ship which could sail on land or water, and when the king saw it, he felt he could no longer refuse him his daughter. So they celebrated the wedding with great rejoicings, and after the king's death, Dullhead succeeded to the kingdom, and lived happily with his wife for many years after. The Seven Foals. There was once upon a time a couple of poor folks who lived in a wretched hut, far away from everyone else, in a wood. They only just managed to live from hand to mouth, and had great difficulty in doing even so much as that. But they had 3 sons, and the youngest of them was called Cinderlad, for he did nothing else but lie and poke about among the ashes. One day the eldest lad said that he would go out to earn his living. He soon got leave to do that, and set out on his way into the world. He walked on for the whole day, and when night was beginning to fall, he came to a royal palace. The king was standing outside on the steps, and asked where he was going. "Oh, I am going about seeking a place, my father," said the youth. "Wilt thou serve me and watch my 7 foals?" asked the king. "If thou canst watch them for a whole day and tell me at night what they eat and drink, thou shalt have the princess and half my kingdom. But if thou canst not, I will cut 3 red stripes on thy back." The youth thought that it was very easy work to watch the foals, and that he could do it well enough. Next morning, when day was beginning to dawn, the king's master of the horse let out the 7 foals, and they ran away, and the youth after them just as it chanced, over hill and dale, through woods and bogs. When the youth had run thus for a long time, he began to be tired, and when he had held on a little longer, he was heartily weary of watching it all. And at the same moment, he came to a cleft in a rock where an old woman was sitting, spinning with her distaff in her hand. As soon as she caught sight of the youth, who was running after the foals, till the perspiration streamed down his face, she cried, come hither, my handsome son, and let me comb your hair for you." The lad was willing enough, so he sat down in the cleft of the rock beside the old hag, and laid his head on her knees, and she combed his hair all day, while he lay there and gave himself up to idleness. When evening was drawing near, the youth wanted to go. "I may just as well go straight home again," said he, "for it is no use to go to the king's palace." "Wait till it is dusk," said the old hag, "and then the king's foals will pass by this place again, and you can run home with them. No one will ever know that you have been lying here all day instead of watching the foals." So when they came, she gave the lad a bottle of water and a bit of moss, and told him to show these to the king and say that this was what his 7 foals ate and drank. "Hast thou watched faithfully and well the whole day long?" said the king when the lad came into his presence in the evening. "Yes, that I have," said the youth. "Then you are able to tell me what it is that my 7 foals eat and drink," said the king. So the youth produced the bottle of water and the bit of moss which he had got from the old woman, saying, "Here you see their meat, and here you see their drink." Then the king knew how his watching had been done, and fell into such a rage that he ordered his people to chase the youth back to his own home at once. But first they were to cut 3 red stripes in his back and rub salt into them. When the youth reached home again, anyone can imagine what a state of mind he was in. He had gone out once to seek a place, he said, but never would he do such a thing again. Next day the second son said that he would now go out into the world to seek his fortune. His father and mother said no, and bade him look at his brother's back, but the youth would not give up his design, and stuck to it, and after a long time he got leave to go, and set forth on his way. When he had walked all day, he too came to the king's palace, and the king was standing outside on the steps, and asked where he was going. And when the youth replied that he was going about in search of a place, the king said that he might enter into his service and watch his 7 foals. Then the king promised him the same punishment and the same reward that he had promised his brother. The youth at once consented to this and entered into the king's service, for he thought he could easily watch the foals and inform the king what they ate and drank. In the gray light of dawn, the master of the horse let out the 7 foals, and off they went again over hill and dale, and off went the lad after them. But all went with him as it had gone with his brother. When he had run after the foals for a long, long time, and was hot and tired, he passed by a cleft in the rock where an old woman was sitting spinning with a distaff, and she called to him, "Come hither, my handsome son, and let me comb your hair." The youth liked the thought of this, let the foals run where they chose, and seated himself in the cleft of the rock by the side of the old hag. So there he sat with his head on her lap, taking his ease the livelong day. The foals came back in the evening, and then he too got a bit of moss and a bottle of water from the old hag, which things he was to show to the king. But when the king asked the youth, "Canst thou tell me what my 7 foals eat and drink?" And the youth showed him the bit of moss and the bottle of water, and said, "Yes, here may you behold their meat, and hear their drink." The king once more became wroth, and commanded that 3 red stripes should be cut on the lad's back, that salt should be strewn upon them, and that he should then be instantly chased back to his own home. So, when the youth got home again, he too related all that had happened to him, and he too said that he had gone out in search of a place once, but that never would he do it again. On the 3rd day, Cinderlad wanted to set out. He had a fancy to try to watch the 7 foals himself, he said. The 2 others laughed at him and mocked him. "What? When all went so ill with us, do you suppose that you are going to succeed? You look like succeeding, you who have never done anything else but lie and poke about among the ashes," said they. "Yes, I will go too," said Cinderlad, "for I have taken it into my head." The 2 brothers laughed at him, and his father and mother begged him not to go, but all to no purpose, and Cinderlad set out on his way. So when he had walked the whole day, he too came to the king's palace as darkness began to fall. There stood the king outside on the steps, and he asked whither he was bound. "I am walking about in search of a place," said Cinderlad. "From whence do you come, then?" inquired the king, for by this time he wanted to know a little more about the men before he took any of them into his service. So Cinderlad told him whence he came, and that he was brother to the 2 who had watched the 7 foals for the king. And then he inquired if he might be allowed to try to watch them on the following day. "Oh, shame on them," said the king, for it enraged him even to think of them. "If thou art brother to those 2, thou too art not good for much. I have had enough of such fellows." "Well, but as I have come here, you might just give me leave to make the attempt," said Cinderlad. "Oh, very well. If thou art absolutely determined to have thy back flayed, thou mayst have thine own way if thou wilt," said the king. "I would much rather have the princess," said Cinderlad. Next morning, in the grey light of dawn, the master of the horse led out the 7 foals again, and off they set over hill and dale, through woods and bogs, and off went Cinderlad after them. When he had run thus for a long time, he too came to the cleft in the rock. There the old hag was once more sitting spinning from her distaff, and she cried to Cinderlad, come hither, my handsome son, and let me comb your hair for you." "Come to me, then, come to me," said Cinderlad, as he passed by, jumping and running, and keeping tight hold of one of the foal's tails. When he had got safely past the cleft in the rock, the youngest foal said, "Get on my back, for we have still a long way to go." So the lad did this, and thus they journeyed onwards a long, long way. "Dost thou see anything now?" said the foal. "No," said Cinderlad. So they journeyed onwards a good bit farther. "Dost thou see anything now?" asked the foal. "Oh, no," said the lad. When they had gone thus for a long, long way, the foal again asked, "Dost thou see anything now?" "Yes, now I see something that is white," said Cinderlad. "It looks like the trunk of a great, thick birch tree." "Yes, that is where we are to go in," said the foal. When they got to the trunk, the eldest foal broke it down on one side, and then they saw a door where the trunk had been standing, and inside this there was a small room. And in the room there was scarcely anything but a small fireplace and a couple of benches. But behind the door hung a great rusty sword and a small pitcher. "Canst thou wield that sword?" asked the foal. Cinderlad tried, but could not do it, so he had to take a draught from the pitcher, and then one more, and after that still another, and then he was able to wield the sword with perfect ease. "Good," said the foal, "and now thou must take the sword away with thee, and with it shalt thou cut off the heads of all 7 of us on thy wedding day, and then we shall become princes again, as we were before. For we are brothers of the princess, whom thou art to have, when thou canst tell the king what we eat and drink. But there is a mighty troll, who has cast a spell over us. When thou hast cut off our heads, thou must take the greatest care to lay each head at the tail of the body to which it belonged before. And then the spell which the troll has cast upon us will lose all its power." Cinderlad promised to do this, and then they went on farther. When they had traveled a long, long way, the foal said, "Dost thou see anything?" "No," said Cinderlad. So they went on a great distance farther. "And now?" inquired the foal. "Seest thou nothing now?" "Alas, no," said Cinderlad. So they traveled onwards again, for many and many a mile, over hill and dale. "Now then," said the foal, "dost thou not see anything now?" "Yes," said Cinderlad. "Now I see something like a bluish streak, far, far away." "That is a river," said the foal, "and we have to cross it." There was a long, handsome bridge over the river, and when they had got to the other side of it, they again traveled on a long, long way. And then once more the foal inquired if Cinderlad saw anything. Yes, this time he saw something that looked black, far, far away, and was rather like a church tower. "Yes," said the foal, "we shall go into that." When the foals got into the churchyard, they turned into men and looked like the sons of a king, and their clothes were so magnificent that they shone with splendor. And they went into the church and received bread and wine from the priest, who was standing before the altar. And Cinderlad went in too. But when the priest had laid his hands on the princes and read the blessing, they went out of the church again, and Cinderlad went out too, but he took with him a flask of wine and some consecrated bread. No sooner had the 7 princes come out into the churchyard than they became foals again. And Cinderlad got upon the back of the youngest, and they returned by the way they had come, only they went much, much faster. First they went over the bridge, and then past the trunk of the birch tree, and then past the old hag who sat in the cleft of the rock spinning, and they went by so fast that Cinderlad could not hear what the old hag screeched after him, but just heard enough to understand that she was terribly enraged. It was all but dark when they got back to the king at nightfall, and he himself was standing in the courtyard waiting for them. "Hast thou watched well and faithfully the whole day?" said the king to Cinderlad. "I have done my best," replied Cinderlad. "Then thou canst tell me what my 7 foals eat and drink?" asked the king. So Cinderlad pulled out the consecrated bread and the flask of wine, and showed them to the king. "Here may you behold their meat, and hear their drink," said he. "Yes, diligently and faithfully hast thou watched," said the king, "and thou shalt have the princess and half the kingdom." So all was made ready for the wedding, and the king said that it was to be so stately and magnificent that everyone should hear of it, and everyone inquire about it. But when they sat down to the marriage feast, the bridegroom arose and went down to the stable, for he said that he had forgotten something which he must go and look to. When he got there, he did what the foals had bidden him, and cut off the heads of all the 7, first the eldest, and then the second, and so on according to their age, and he was extremely careful to lay each head at the tail of the foal to which it had belonged, and when that was done, all the foals became princes again. When he returned to the marriage feast with the 7 princes, the king was so joyful that he both kissed Cinderlad and clapped him on the back, and his bride was still more delighted with him than she had been before. "Half my kingdom is thine already," said the king, "and the other half shall be thine after my death, for my sons can get countries and kingdoms for themselves, now that they have become princes again." Therefore, as all may well believe, there was joy and merriment at that wedding.